in our industry that change can really happen, and that indeed consumer drivers are very relevant to that. Our next speaker can actually address that consumer perspective very well, because our next speaker is Noel Clarke. He's working as a general manager for Unilever in the Nordics. Holds a long career in fast-moving consumer goods and A brands, so I've really worked on the interface of consumers for a very long time. On that perspective, probably can make a very good connection deal to what you have been describing to us. So I'm very much looking forward to this speech. Sustainability in all its elements and his view on the changing seafood consumer perspective, thriving in periods of change, purpose fit and future fit. That is what Neil brought to us. I hope you're there. Yes, he is there. Perfect. He's joining us by Skype. So I think we have one down because technology worked in our favor. And let's have a close look at what Noel is going to tell us. Noel, the screen.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for the chance to come and address you guys. I think up until Monday, my plan was to be there in person. But as a response to the COVID-19, we've introduced some new protocols in our business, which kind of prevent us from traveling to large groups internationally. So unfortunately, not there in person to get the chance to meet you all, but a real delight to get the chance to address the group. So thank you for that, and hopefully the technology will work for us. I mean, similar to what Giles said, right? I work for a consumer goods company where we do everything from laundry to skincare to ice cream. And so my understanding of the fisheries industry is dwarfed by the people in the room. You know, an Irish guy that ran an ice cream business that now has the luxury of being responsible for leading Unilever's business in the Nordics. You know, what should we discuss in this time? And so what I think makes most sense is what are we doing? What is our response? What are the challenges we face? How do we see the business systems working in tandem to try and deal with some of the problems we face, but through that, create good business? And that's the focus of what I'd like to talk through. So I think that we're going to work it. I think we're going to flip to presentation mode. So because I believe the stream won't allow us to do both. But let's try that out now. The first thing to say, so we as a business, you know, Unilever, although very well known globally, maybe not so well known in Norway, where it's not our biggest market, but we've been in business now since 1885. In fact, a guy by the name of William Lever, posthumously named Lord Lever Hume, he was in many ways, you know, the first social entrepreneur. He existed in a time in the UK where sanitation was an issue, child mortality was an issue, and people could buy products, but they couldn't trust what was in those products. And so the invention of a brand, Sunlight Soap in this case, and advertising, a consistency of production, a consistency of message, so people can have faith in what they're doing and what they're buying and what they're using. That was basically the underpinnings of the Unilever business model. Based on a purpose of wanting to solve society's problems and in the belief that there's a good business model to be had in that. And that's pretty much underpinned the journey of Unilever to today. You know, 130 years later, we're now a big global business, you know, which is, I guess, great for shareholders. But from our perspective, that means quite a few things, you know, a certain responsibility. There's 52 billion euros worth of Unilever's products bought every year in pretty much every country in the world. And as a former marketer, probably the greatest strength we have in some ways is our ability to, in solving those small problems for people every day, is to nudge them in terms of what they consume, how they consume, where they place value. Every single day in the world, 2.5 billion households touch a Unilever product. And so we believe that our bigger role is not just to create products that we are proud to sell, but how do we influence a third of the population's consumption choices? And I've got a short video actually that hopefully will bring that to life a bit better than I can do myself. So if you guys could play the video there just for about a minute or so, that'd be brilliant, please.
Every single day, 2.5 billion people around the world use our brands. This gives us a great opportunity to use our scale and reach to take a stand, do better for the planet, and build a brighter future for generations to come. Which is why our purpose is to make sustainable living commonplace. We are already working to address today's most pressing social and environmental issues head on, empowering the underrepresented, improving health and hygiene around the world, and doing more good, not just less harm, throughout our supply chains. But there's still so much more to be done. We believe that today's fresh talent, tomorrow's future makers, you, can help us in our mission to harness the power of technology, pick up the pace with our sustainability commitments, and be bolder and more courageous in creating the change we need to see, both in Unilever and beyond.
Thank you. So we have this mantra we use internally, and it says, companies with purpose last, brands with purpose grow, and people with purpose thrive. And the big thought behind that is, we're 130 years old. If we're going to be here for the next 130 years, then we have to be a purpose-based business and make a difference in the society we're in. It's not, the doing good department and the doing business department. It's the same department. And never is that more important than now, right? I mean, we've all been inundated, even today, with the statistics of how the world will never change this slowly again. Be that some of the extreme weather conditions we're seeing. On one side of the globe, the biggest wildfire season in history. On the other side of the globe, the biggest flooding in history. If you go beyond that, just look at our populations and levels of population growth and the polarities that's creating for the people we serve. A third of the world's population use consumer products from Unilever. And even within that group, we've got 800 million people that don't have access to clean drinking water. That's an existential crisis when you sell laundry products. The population of North America and Europe combined can't access clean drinking water. 2 million children a year dying of diarrhea, basically controlled by washing your hands. If we look at then, our shepherding of the environment we're in, 2/3 of all the species of the world will have vanished by the end of this year. And even here in Europe, where we are far more engaged with some of these challenges, and certainly in the Nordics, probably the most progressive society of all, 42% of the land species in Europe have declined in population in the last 10 years, in the time that we've been aware of these challenges and problems. So the idea that we make sustainable living commonplace is not about philanthropy. It's not about philanthropy at all. It's a business model. The idea here is that we can unite the doing good department and the doing business department into one, because our consumers want it. We just heard from Tesco, our retailers want it. And certainly in my 8 months here in the Nordics, I would argue that the key retailers in each of the major Scandinavian and Nordic markets are as advanced as any in their expectations. But also it gives me the chance to come here and talk to you guys. So this is a business model and makes sense. So where do we start? Well, the first thing, when you're pointing a finger at someone else, you realize very rapidly there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. So you've got to start by getting your own house in order. I talked about the fact we're a big business. We do everything from oral care to hair care but just to zoom a little bit in on our food business, this is about getting our own house in order first. There's 3 key areas we've been focused on now for a number of years and still have much more work to do. The first one is in how we sustainably source our raw materials. Right, we have a very big impact on crop cycles around the world for the key ingredients that we consume, and how we work to ensure that they're certified and sustainable is a crucial part of our plan. And in fact, our top 12 crops, which are about 90% of what we produce, in 2020, 95% of them will be sustainably sourced. So we're on that journey, but it goes beyond that, right? So even in terms of how we manufacture, in every continent in the world, we now manufacture using sustainable energy with a goal to go beyond that, to actually generate more energy than we consume. If we look at the people in our value chain, because again, some of the causes of these problems are that the inconsistencies on who is making money and the lack of shared prosperity in the supply chain mean that people are not incentivized to improve the quality of their agricultural processes. So by paying a fair amount, by ensuring the products are sourced in a certified way, yes, we're making sure that farmers' families go to school, and 80% of all the production of food in the world happens through smallholder farmers. But B, we're also ensuring that they can invest in their own capabilities and effectiveness of how they produce. And then, of course, in a business with our history, access to water and the impact of how we use water in our supply chain, but also sanitation, hygiene, are key areas of focus for us. So step one, getting our own house in order. But, we think we'd have to go beyond that. Like I say, we've got a big footprint, both in the value streams we operate in, upstream to our suppliers, downstream to our customers, and right through to the consumer's household. And we think we can have a big impact there. And so again, as you zero in on the food industry, what are the areas that we want to go above and beyond, making sure our own footprint is clean and has integrity, and actually have a bigger, more regenerative impact. And we're focusing on a few areas. So eliminating deforestation. So first of all, we know, look, 15% of total global greenhouse gases are linked to the agricultural processes associated with commodity foods. This is chopping down rainforests, etc. We want to plant more trees than we chop down. We want to ensure that we recycle more plastic than we use. We make commitments around generating more electricity than we consume. And I think this idea that big businesses and big business systems, of which we were all connected, can do something governments can't, because we're not limited by geographic boundaries. We can have a really big impact in actually not just sustaining, but regenerating. The second big area for us is this idea of improving our food security. And I'll talk more about this in a second. The idea that we are, as a population, using a few key crops, using a few key food ingredients to an extent that is actually damaging society. And how, through going back to Lord Lever Hume's insight, how can we help people solve small problems every day, and through that process overcome the issues of food security? And then crucially, this point on how we use water in our supply chain and access to hygiene and sanitation. So let me just drill down one, because some of the big issues we have in our food industry are around the business model itself, and who we reward in the supply chain, and how we reward them, and how we work as a system, not as a company, but as a system of companies and associations to create value where historically there wasn't. And there's an awful lot of work that we do in this space. Only 7 months ago, even though my responsibility is to be general manager here in the Nordics, I was in Tanzania and East Africa working on a tea program to try and increase the productive capacity of smallholder farmers by 600%. And that's something that we get our people involved in, but we try and create business systems with our partners around that. The facts are, as Giles mentioned a few minutes ago, the estimation is that by 2050, the world population will be 10 billion people, which is huge. And I think we're all aware of that. But probably what's a little bit scarier is that over the course of the next 30 years, on that journey to 10 billion people, we will need to produce more food in the next 30 years than we have produced in the last 10,000 years to feed everybody. So if our systems are already under pressure and struggling, and we are going beyond the bounds of our planetary capabilities, you kind of look into the future and think, how are we going to cope with that? When you ladder on top of that, 25% of total emissions of greenhouse gases are linked to how we use land for agriculture. Our food system's resilience and our ability to generate nutritional diversity is a massive issue already. The fact that 60% of human beings' calories is made up across wheat, rice, potatoes, and corn. 4 grains that basically contribute 60% of our calories, but not always farmed in the most sustainable way and not giving us necessarily the nutritional profiles we need. These are some of the challenges we need to unpick. And then probably the one that in some ways is the most ironic is that although the population will grow as much as I've described, we already produce today enough food to feed the population in 2050. But because of the makeup of our value chains and where we place, profit, basically, where different actors are incentivized or not incentivized. About 30% of all the food produced in a farm never gets to the plate, either because it was considered to be a secondary product and not good enough to sell, or because it was lost in transit, or because the economics of getting it to the plate didn't make sense. And so there's business systems that businesses with NGOs, with governments, have to face into and deal with one by one to solve that problem. Because the reality is, if you do solve that problem, it's not just, you know, a kind of a green logo you get to put on your products. It's really good business sense. You know, the estimates are that in the next 10 years alone, in solving this problem, it will create 80 million jobs dealing with some of these business system transformations, and create 2 trillion in value, in productive growth. And so we think it makes really good business sense. So what are we doing specifically? And it's a big company, it's an awful lot, but 2 areas to kind of zero in on, you know, particularly in our food part of our business. The way we grow or manufacture food, we want to evolve and change. And the way we consume food, and the way we as a marketing and brand-led company encourage people to consume food has to change. And that involves mostly, you know, starting with the end in mind. I talked about the fact that our consumption of food and our consumption of calories is focused on a few key grains. And how can we change that? And we already are aware of the global cattle herd and the impact that has on CO2 emissions. So we believe we've got to diversify food consumption, change what people eat. And as we go on that journey, we got to diversify food production, change how we make those foods. And in really simple terms, that means moving towards a more balanced diet with more grains in it, more plant-based elements in that diet to support human and planetary health. And secondly, it means in terms of how we produce the food, moving from, you know, raising the floor, getting to a point where you are confident that what you're selling is sustainably sourced, to setting yourself goals and targets where it's actually more than sustainable, it's regenerating, where you are planting more than you're using. And we've set ourselves specific goals over the course of the next 15 years in 3-year cycles for how we'll meet that across our different businesses. The first part within that is we are a brand-led company. So we know, particularly in the Nordics, that there are some fairly big trends. In fact, about 17% of people in this part of the world claim to be following some form of plant-based or meat-free lifestyle. And there's a number of food trends. I've chosen this one particularly because it's the one that's most prevalent in this part of the world. And we're exporting this trend around the world. And so we see even parts of the world where meat is a particularly large part of the diet, like South America, even there we're seeing this trend starting to take off. We only anticipate this will increase. But once you've had the first 15% of early adopters, people who are typically well-informed, well-educated, and understand their impact, you then have to bring the rest on the journey. And that's where these brands, these major household brands, have a key role to play. In the last 12 months, we've developed and launched over 200 products that are either organic, plant-based, or vegan on our major brands to drive the transition on how people consume. The second major thing we're doing is just recently been working with the WWF in the UK to develop the Future 50 Foods report, which identifies the key grains beyond the current 4 that are highly challenged in terms of their manufacturing processes, the key 50 grains that we should be migrating towards to help feed the population of the future. And as well as working with WWF to identify them, we're also using our own access to restaurants and professional chefs to start to introduce these into restaurants. So with Sodexo, who are the biggest professional food deliverer in the world, we're already working with them closely with our Unilever Food Solutions chefs on developing menus and recipes around those 50 grains. So to change the way people consume so that we can then change the way suppliers produce and supply. There's an awful lot we could talk about, but in the end, I think the most compelling thing is this makes business sense. This is how companies last. This is how people thrive. You know, across our organization, when you look at the people who enter into our company, and there's 130,000 people within Unilever, the number one reason they now join Unilever is because of our purpose, because this idea that we can make sustainable living commonplace. It's a huge attraction. The business case for growing is huge. 2 trillion of potential value growth in the developed world in the next 10 years if we solve these problems. We firmly believe that our license to operate as an industry is under threat. But on the flip side of that equation, there's a huge opportunity to change our business, to change consumer consumption behavior, and to change the supply chains associated with them. But it's a system, it's not a company. And how we come to events like this to share ideas together, but also how we create supply chains together are key. What's clear is we have to act now, that consumers are getting ahead of companies at this point. Giles mentioned packaging, and having been in the UK only 7 months ago, it was very clear to me that consumers were ahead of manufacturers and retailers. Here in the Nordics, we've already made huge steps towards PCR, so recycled plastic in our packaging. We cannot stay in stock. The moment to act is now. The market is there, but as an industry, we've got to break our own inertia by working in tandem, working in partnership, identifying the key areas that we want to measure, and then systematically going after those. So thank you all very much for your time. Apologies for the fact I couldn't be there in person. Hopefully the idea that we believe to be true, that we can thrive in these times of change, and it makes great business sense, is something that we've had a chance to share with you all. And although I won't be there in the breakouts, I'd love offline through email and phone calls to connect with anybody who'd like to talk more on this. Thank you.